A stressful decision-making environment for aerial firefighter training in VR. It's all yours.
Hello everyone, my name's Rory. I feel very privileged and proud to present my work to you guys and represent my lab, the HIT Lab New Zealand. So we're always looking for research assistants and interns and visiting professors. If you're interested, please get in touch with me or Rob Lindeman. Right, so training in VR for aerial firefighting. So why are we doing this? Every year we see an increase in wildfire events, and we're generally dependent on helicopters and aircraft to put these things out. But however, these things are quite high risk and very costly to do. Even the training's very costly. It costs, maybe a couple of $100,000 to run a training, and the fire events themselves to put out are about $1 million+ in New Zealand. In other parts of the world, it's even more. So, and there's also very limited training opportunities for these guys. So it only really happens in the summer when the fire season is. They only get to practice around then. So we want to give them an opportunity to practice in the off season, so usually around winter. So this is what we're kind of looking at. They're pretty dangerous looking things. This guy here is the Air Attack Supervisor. So this is who we're looking at training. So his responsibility is to look after all the aircraft in the sky and manage them over the fire ground and communicate with the ground crews and operations. So we're really looking at trying to improve their ability when they require it. So for what we're hypothesizing here is that the VR system actually results in equivalent stress as experienced in a real-world field training exercise, and that this system is creating more confidence post-training than compared with their traditional radio-only exercises. So that's basically them sitting in a room, pretending visualizing in their mind and using a handheld radio to perform this training task. And we also hypothesize that the training experience in VR induces a greater stress than that radio exercise. So this is what we've come up with. So we actually compared 3 conditions here. So we've got the low fidelity exercise, which is the radio exercise, our high fidelity virtual reality system, so it's a multi-sensory training experience, a collaborative training experience. And we also compare that with the real world, what we call perfect fidelity field exercise. And in all these experiments, the radio chatter, the background chatter is constant, as well as the Air Attack Supervisor trainer. So he's sitting behind the guy training and evaluating his performance, as well as the operations manager who's creating the stress or the stimulus, the radio stimulus for him. So we measured heart rate variability, and we also used a short stress state questionnaire to evaluate these. So due to time limitations, we could only really perform the stress state questionnaire in the low fidelity and the high fidelity exercise. And we used the heart rate variability in the high fidelity exercise and the perfect fidelity exercise. So we did this because we had very limited time. These guys are quite busy, and their training is quite, I don't want to say rushed, but we couldn't do all the measurements for all conditions. So we decided that the low fidelity, we would know that it's probably not going to create as much stress as a real world exercise or physiological stress. So we used the short stress state questionnaire for that, and the HRV would be better off in the perfect fidelity and high fidelity exercises. So what we did is we created a virtual air operations platform. So that's the helicopter that the Air Attack Supervisor sits in. So he's just performing radio duties, and he sits next to a pilot, and he's guiding the pilot using hand signals. And we also had 3 helicopter bucket crews. So these are the guys he would communicate with to coordinate an attack on a virtual fire, as well as having the operations manager present and an air support supervisor, as well as the AAS. And this is pretty typical of a fire response. So this is the air operations platform. So it's a 270-degree projection surround system. We've also paired it with a vibro tactile feedback like chair. So we just bolted or welded 2 chairs together and bolted these big transducers, about 1,000 watt each, and that would create vibrations that would simulate helicopter engine vibrations. And we also provided them a push-to-talk communication system, so he could communicate directly with his pilot, but he had to push a button to be able to talk with the other people present in the simulation. So this is on the left is the air support guys, so they're calculating fuel and water and fire retardant values and providing that information to the Air Attack Supervisor. And the guys on the right, we've got the helicopter bucket crew and the operations management sitting behind them. And we put these guys in the same room because the operations management wanted to be able to create kind of like havoc at times, and they wanted to like poke the bucket crews to be able to tell them, oh, you should simulate you need a return to base kind of thing. And they wanted to do that without alerting the air attack, because he needs to be kind of maintaining a state of stress, which is what they experience in a real fire. So this is the sensor we use for the heart rate variability. It's a wireless sensor from Zephyr. It's a biomodule 3, and it can be transmitted via Bluetooth to any kind of computer, and you can read that information in real time, which is quite handy to see what's going on when events occur. So this is an excerpt of the HRV in our virtual reality experience. So you might see that there's a bit of a bump here. So what happened here is the operations management team wanted to create more stress and asked me to increase the amount of fire that was present. Unfortunately, that created a lag, or like a significant amount of frame rate drop. So we had to kind of reset the system then. So that's why it's spiked, because he's basically not in task or not in the flow anymore. And near the end, that's basically when it came back together. So it's generally like up here is where they're in a rest state. Is that actually up? Yeah. So that's when they're kind of in a rest state, and then when they're entering the task, their heart rate variability goes down. So in heart rate variability, it's the time that elapses, or time between your heartbeats. So it's different than your heart rate, which is, you know, your beats per minute. So in HRV, it's actually the shorter amount of time induced is actually showing like a greater amount of stress, because your heart's beating more rapidly, which means like less time has elapsed between your heartbeat. So that's why it's going downwards. And what we did to evaluate that, because it's difficult to kind of compare just reading that data that I showed before. So we basically took the lowest point that they reached in their heart rate variability and used that. We collected all that and we compared that between the real world and the virtual world, as we felt that was when they hit their most stressful state. And as you can see here, it's it looks fairly similar. Like they're very similar in their lowest heart rate variability reached. And so so that was the comparison between the real world and the virtual world. So now we're looking at the radio world and the virtual world, because we want to see if there's any difference in their existing training and what we're proposing as a virtual substitute. So this is like a few examples of the questions that are asked in this short stress state questionnaire. And there's about 30 questions, and they're categorized into 3 main things, which are engagement, distress, and worry. And this is the results from that. So the engagement and distress look, so this is pre-exercise and post-exercise. So the engagement and distress, we didn't find any significant differences between the radio and the virtual worlds. But for worry, we found a significant difference between this. So that's the virtual world and the radio world. Basically, we couldn't find any significant differences there. So our sample size was actually quite small, but they were all expert firefighters, so that made our study quite valid. But at the same time, it made the statistics, we couldn't really conclude much. And the other thing is, as I mentioned before, is that not all of the tests or the heart rate variability in SSSQ, we couldn't do that in each condition. And we also made the assumption that the real world and the virtual world, the stresses that they're experiencing are the same, which is, it's a bit of a stretch to assume that. But where in the real world, they're actually experiencing altitude differences, and in the virtual world, they're just sitting on the ground. So, and altitude is known to actually affect the heart rate. And so our radio and VR conditions, we saw the difference in the worry, which is actually really good, because after the VR exercise, they found that they were less worried, which means that they were more confident in their ability post the exercise. So we're really happy about that result. So the trainees actually, they reported that they improved their confidence, and they really appreciated using the actual physical radios, and they really wanted more real objects like the actual gauge clusters and radio console, as well as things like the pillars, because actually they use the pillars as reference points. Like when they look around a pillar, they can use it to judge distances and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, with the projection system, the resolution was difficult to spot things, so they couldn't identify who the pilots were who were doing the bucketing operation. So yeah, we really want to try doing this exercise again, but using the sensors in all the situations as well as the SSQ, and we want to incorporate more of those real world objects as they were really calling out for. We want to improve the multi-sensory experience by adding things like what they smell in a helicopter, which is like burnt jet fuel and hot leather actually. So we're working on a way to synthesize that smell and emit it whilst they're training. And yeah, we really want to perform more training exercises with them just to get more clear results with the statistics. So to conclude, yeah, we couldn't really reject that the real world and the VR results were any different, so that was quite a good result. Yeah, the greater post-training confidence was, we say it's partially supported because of that worry result, but because of the engagement and distress scores were the same, so we can't really fully conclude that. And yeah, the same with the fact that the VR training induces greater stress in the radio than the radio exercise, because of the low sample size, it was too difficult to conclude that. Cool. So I just really want to say thanks to Fire and Emergency New Zealand and Ngāi Tahu Research Centre, as well as Scion, for providing the camera equipment. And I invite your questions. Thank you very much. Anyone want to come research at the lab? Would love to have you.
If you have so many fires.
Yeah, we experience a fire, at least one big fire a year, so, and they're really destructive, so we want to make them really prepared for that. Stefan, did you have a question? No.
All right. You want to start setting up?
Do you want to use this one?
Well, thank you for the presentation, Rory. My name is
Thanks.
Stefan Lukas, still Delft, soon perhaps Hitler. I was wondering, you mainly quantified the impact of the training in VR using the stress level and the heart rate variability. Have you considered other means to measure the learning outcome? So how could you really see whether they learn the same thing and train the same things? Have you ideas on that?
Yeah, we could working with the trainers, we should establish some things that they really want them to report on, or what they've seen, or how they basically what things they report, or when they see things out in the field, and coming up with some metrics around that. I guess that would be a good way to tackle that. So yeah, we'll look into that as the project keeps developing. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yeah, I think that it's I think that the question even goes a bit further, but I think it's how do you actually know that training has an impact and people really learn something? You just know when there's a real fire,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Yeah.
the question is how to really compare that and how to measure that.
Yeah, it'll be a really tough one because
Yeah.
all fires are different, and it's really difficult to really be able to gauge that. So yeah, I don't know if we'll ever be able to do that, but maybe a way with the virtual world, like when we come up with certain tasks they have to do in the VR world, then they have to establish like this is the baseline, and have they achieved that, and then use that as learning outcomes. I think that'd be a good
Yeah, that
good
sounds
solution.
like a great idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
How do we get back?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.